now. And I love the new Zoom feature where she lets all of you know. And then most of all today, we're just here to learn some new information and have fun. So as Kathy already mentioned, these are the objectives today. So we're really going to think about and talk about how to set your team up for success. I know you just moved to a situation where folks were able to choose where they wanted to work. And most of your teams are probably 100% remote. And then we're also going to talk about how to communicate and build community. And as Kathy mentioned, we have a few other sessions. We'll have 3 more sessions that will build off of this one. So some of the things we touch on today, we'll go into a little bit deeper in some future sessions. So let's talk about what a remote team is. I know all of us were put into a situation over the past however many months it's been, where folks were moved home and started working there. And when we think about a remote team, we think about it not only in terms of where they're located or maybe not being in a co-located office, but also a team that might be dispersed from a distance or time zone perspective, which we're seeing here today from where all of you are based. And what this also means is that you've changed the way in which you communicate. So now that you don't see one another face to face, there's different ways in which you have to communicate based through things such as Zoom, other types of technology, and other ways that challenge the boundaries of how we work. So just to start, we would love to get your feedback. I'm going to open up a poll, and we really want to know what you find most challenging right now in terms of managing your team. So you'll see on the slide, hopefully everybody can see my slides. There are 4 choices. When I open the poll, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the polling feature on Zoom. You'll have the opportunity to choose to give your answer if you find it's setting expectations, motivating your team, creating those impromptu collaboration moments, or what we used to refer to as water cooler moments in the office. And also, or is it building camaraderie and teamwork? So I'm going to open the poll right now. You should see that on your screens. So just go ahead and choose what you find to be the most challenging right now. I'm seeing the answers come in, so I'll just give you another 30 seconds or so. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, all of them. Jen, I understand that completely. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close. Yeah. So we'll touch on most of these today, and this also will give us an idea in terms of what we can also share with you in the upcoming sessions as well. So for most of you right now, the thing that is the most difficult is creating those impromptu collaboration moments. And we definitely have heard from our clients how difficult that can be, particularly because you can't do drive-bys of people's desks, or you don't bump into somebody in the cafeteria, or wherever you might normally have some opportunity for collaboration. So thank you for sharing. And Jen and Alex, for sure, I think a lot of this has been difficult across the board. So let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits and some of the additional challenges of managing a remote team. So of course, we know now that, as we were just saying, because we looked at where we're having some challenges, some of the challenges are those opportunities, some of the benefits of being in person were those opportunities to see one another, whereas we don't necessarily get to see one another that much anymore in a virtual setting. Also, sharing that physical environment was something that was really a benefit when we were in person as well. And also with traditional teams, it feels like sometimes it's easier to develop that sense of belonging, commitment, and responsibility towards one another and the team. So if you think about that in terms of what challenges you might have, it also could be the same. If you flip it in terms of those are the benefits, now we have some challenges in terms of thinking about how do we communicate regularly? How do we continue to people focused on their goals? How do we get people feeling involved and connected? And also, how do we let people know that they are recognized for their efforts? Any other benefits or challenges you're seeing right now? Of course, another benefit that we're hearing a lot from folks as we move to this remote environment is, really being able to establish the boundaries of their own work days. Feel free to comment in the chat if there's anything else that you see as another benefit or a challenge to working in your remote teams. So when we think about the shift that has just happened, and particularly with you at Aura having to move or deciding to move to almost 100% virtual, you really have to shift your mindset from thinking about we're in a co-located team and now we're moving remote. So what are some of those things that you have been thinking about in terms of how you shift your mindset in managing your team differently? I know for managers, when we do move folks to a remote or a dispersed team, one of the things to think about is, how do I communicate in a way that gets my point across? So you move from thinking about or speaking first or being able to have a one-on-one conversation in person to having to write first to get your point across. You also have to think about, how do you embody trust and how do you instill that in your people when you can't see them doing work on a day-to-day basis? The next thing is really thinking about how to be intentional about creating that social connection, because we aren't as naturally connected when we're in this remote environment. Anything else you're thinking about that you need to do differently as a manager and as a leader in your remote environment right now? Feel free to add any comments, any questions to the chat. So let's talk about some of the foundations of leading a remote team. These are the core pillars that we think about. So there's trust, and we'll dig a little bit more into trust in a couple of upcoming sessions. And I think it's the third session when we really talk about building a high performing team. So there's trust. Then there's this communication piece. And we've touched on that in terms of methodology and how you really communicate effectively when your team is remote. And then there's also that visibility and that social connection. So the first thing to think about that we want to touch on is communication. So unless you're communicating face to face or voice to voice, it's sometimes easy to lose that human connection or that human element side of things, which is why we're going to talk a little bit more about how you recognize people's personal needs and the practical needs as well. Yeah, Griffin, for sure. I mean, that is extremely hard to navigate. Griffin just put into the chat, time zone differences are extreme. So if you're working, I don't know where your team is, but for example, if you have somebody in Europe and you're in Boston, or I'm in California. So if you're in California, that can be really tough to try to figure out how to communicate in an effective way when you have 2 hours of overlap, and making sure that you are getting folks what they need to be successful and also being able to interact with them. Absolutely. And we can talk about that a little bit more when we set folks up for what are the expectations and what are the questions you need to be asking your team members in order to help them be most successful. So if we go back to this communication piece, for example, with Griffin's team, you might find that you're continually emailing or texting your team. And while technology makes this all possible, because we're here on Zoom today, meaning can get lost. Sometimes, interaction isn't clear. And so you really have to figure out a way to communicate effectively, especially if there's time zones, cultures, different ways of working. So Griffin, thank you for bringing that up. So when we think about this communication piece, there's two things here. There's this human need, this need to bring the interaction to a human connected level. And then there's also this practical need. So making sure that what you want to get accomplished gets accomplished, and also the practicality of being set up for success in a remote working environment. So if we think about this in a different way, the personal needs, it's kind of like we think about that in terms of being heard and understood, feeling trusted and trusting your colleagues, also feeling supported. And the practical things can be, things such as creating team charters or shared agreements, or making sure that in if they're working from home, somebody's home environment, they have the tools they also need to be successful. So one of the ways that when we talk about communication on a personal level, and this becomes even more important when we are across time zones, when we are all facing different situations in our home setups, whether it be, we might have school-age children at home or others we're looking after. So there's a lot that comes into play with our environment right now. And the things that we continue to think about are these key principles to help meet the personal needs of those folks on your team. So the first is really just esteem. And by that, we mean recognizing people for their efforts. And in this environment now, it's even more important to do that more frequently so that people feel valued and respected. The second is really responding with empathy. This is when your active listening skills come into play, which are even more important in this environment. And also acknowledging that the facts and feelings that people are sharing, you're there and you're hearing. As a manager, it becomes even more important. The next is involvement. So encouraging people across time zones to help, or encouraging people in different locations to help, asking for help. The next is sharing. So we'll talk about this in terms of line of sight for your team, but also sometimes the why and the rationale behind things really helps people to feel connected to the greater meaning of the organization. And the last thing is support. Really helping folks to have what they need to feel that they are responsible for what they're also delivering, and removing barriers that may make it difficult for people to take ownership of their working situations. So let's talk about how you set your team up. Oh, Alex, yeah, that's an interesting one. So absolutely. So I think that also becomes a communication piece of when you decide what the right method of communication is, particularly if there is some type of conflict. And I think that also becomes, a managerial choice, and it depending upon how big the conflict is. If it's a conflict of getting people aligned with the methodology of how you're moving a project forward, sometimes that's what we say, and we can talk about this with high performing teams. It's disagree and commit. I guess you're probably across channels using Slack a lot. And I can understand that would be challenging, and meetings for meeting's sake, yes, that's also exhausting. And so that also, I think, becomes, and we can dig into this a little bit more maybe after some of this content, but that becomes a way in which, we have an organization we work with where they kind of have a rule. If the agenda hasn't been outlined, if people don't know why they're coming to a meeting, and if they don't have an active role in the meeting, then people can decline a meeting. Now, I'm not saying that that's right for you and your team, but it is a way that sometimes, if people don't have a decision-making role, if they're not part of the project team, and if it's just regurgitating the same information over and over again, then perhaps it's time to take a look at the purpose and go back to what the purpose and the agenda of the meeting is. And then I think that the interesting thing about communication with the no in Slack, that can come back to setting expectations and having really clear conversations with your team to set them up for success. To know a no isn't something to take personally. It's just a no in this instance because of the project we're on and moving things forward, or whatever that no might mean. So if we go back to, setting folks up for success, we in modern working world, this hasn't, unless you've been on a remote team your entire life, this hasn't necessarily been a thing that we have all been used to. Some of us in the past year or year and a half had to move very quickly to a remote working environment, and we didn't necessarily have the skill set or the habits to be able to be successful to do that. And then, as managers, you also have on top of that, not only handling your team and trying to figure out new ways to communicate, but then you also have, perhaps policy changes that are going on. And you just had one in the past couple of weeks where, you've been asked if you want to go back into the office. And you also have to keep people apprised of what that means for them and their success as well. So a few key things that we say in terms of expectations is that we all know now that we're in our home offices that overworking can be easy. We get up, we can start working immediately. Sometimes we take our first meeting in our pajamas, and then we go to, we may not stop working till the end of the day. So it's really important that you talk to your direct reports and set clear expectations about what's expected of your team. And that, we were just talking about the meeting piece. Even now more so, it becomes important to let people know what the purpose of a meeting is. And then we were just talking about technique. So, what's the best way to approach something? So is conflict, sometimes conflict, rather than doing something on Slack, if that's something that's really affecting your team because you're not able to move forward or things are stalling as a result of the conflict, then probably the best way to do it is something like this if you can't be face to face. And then setting boundaries as well. We've heard this time and time again that people just don't know when to stop work right now. And also when to push back and say no, because more is being expected of them. And then the last is to communicate, and over communicate when things do change in the office. So we talked a little bit about expectations, and some of these questions are important to consider when defining what success looks like for your team and your people. And this also allows them to know when they're going off track or they're anywhere in between. So, I know that when we moved to a remote working environment or dispersed working environment, one of the things that teams stopped doing was having regular one-on-ones with their direct reports. If you're not having one-on-ones with your direct reports, it's really important to get back into some form of rhythm, even if it's a touch base. And I don't know how your teams are set up. Maybe some of you still have daily stand-ups in a way, but it is really important to have those meetings so that you can talk to them on a personal level, but also share information that they might need to know to be successful. So some of the questions you might want to ask or think about with your teams is, what does success look like right now? What's good enough? And that can also help to define boundaries. What things are less important now that you're in this environment, or what things aren't you as particular about that maybe other managers may have been in the past, or that may have changed with the way in which you're working changed? And how does this fit into the bigger picture of what the organization is doing so that people really are tied to that why? Some ideas, I know it seems that a lot of you, if not all of you, use Slack to communicate with the folks on your team. So the social networking piece you probably have down, although I feel like Slack can be overwhelming at times. So perhaps there's a way to create boundaries or to mitigate some of the chatter and the chat that goes on in a way that's more manageable with your groups. So perhaps putting some boundaries or expectations around that, or even maybe having an hour or two of a moratorium where you're not on Slack so that you can actually focus on work, also can help teams sometimes. One of the other ideas here is really to have a virtual meet and greet. And by that, it's really, when's the last time you checked in on a human level with your team and you shared something to get to know one another? Kathy, before you hopped on, was sharing that one of the things that they do or have done on their teams is ask one another, if you weren't in HR, what would you be, or what were you supposed to be? And just kind of fun ways to break the ice and break down the barriers with teams. I know that organizations are kind of getting tired of the virtual happy hours or the virtual coffee chats or the, but there's fun ways to really get to know your team and to build trust and communicate on different levels. If you do have new folks joining your team, perhaps creating a remote buddy system or mentor system can help. And then, without those collaboration moments or drive-bys, even sometimes just picking up the phone or calling in this way just to check in with somebody really helps to make sure that they feel connected. So creating sight line between your organization and the team. We've chatted about this a little bit, or I mentioned it, just making sure that your team has visibility. So not only are they aware of what's going on in the organization so that they feel valued and part of the organization as a whole, but also finding ways to feed that back up the chain so that your team becomes more visible to the organization as well. And also, allows your team to explore ways for other opportunities, ways you can give recognition, and also just really making them feel like they are tied to the mission, the vision, and the mission critical goals of the organization. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about flexing management style. And then I'm just going to open it up. I know we had about a half an hour today with some buffer for questions, 10, 15 minutes for questions or situations. So we'll do that in a couple of minutes if you want to hang on here. So when we talk about flexing management style, when we refer to management, we think of management as one-to-one. With leadership, we think of that as one-to-many. So you as a manager, where you sit, based on who is on your team, that one approach or one style doesn't work for every individual on your team. It's not to say that you need to show up as a different person in every situation, but understanding your direct reports' unique strengths, their unique DNA, perhaps their backgrounds, what they have that's special to bring to the table really helps to keep them committed and engaged. It produces a more effective and productive team. And it also creates a more inclusive culture so that you have all diverse minds and thoughts at the virtual table when you're going through situations, looking at goals, delegating, doling out who's responsible for what on your team. So I'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on an example where you've seen where a dispersed team has been effectively managed, allowing people to be more of themselves and to be more productive. And what happened in that situation and what did that specifically look like? Or if you have anything as a manager that's a best practice or a tip that you've been using with your team that you have found to be effective to really ensure that people are feeling productive and aren't burnt out and are really performing at their highest level, I would love for you to share that with your colleagues that are here on this call so that they can also take that and bring that back to their teams. And if you feel like unmuting yourself and sharing with the group, we're here for that too. Anything you've seen that has been effective or that you've shifted in the past, even couple of weeks as you've been thinking about how to realign your team? So basically, nobody's seen this work. I'm sure there's somebody who has a tip or a hack or something that would help your colleagues right now.
I can share one, but
okay, great.
Yeah, but actually it's again a problem with huge meetings. Everyone is too timid to step in and just stays on mute. So I agree with one-on-ones. The thing which we implemented is offline text stand-up channel. Basically, since my team is distributed among 3 time zones, there is no good time for everyone to have stand-up. So Kyiv part writes stand-up in their morning, and New York part write stand-up in their morning, etc., etc. And then you have a good place to track what everyone is working on. And especially if for today, I'm planning to collaborate with one of my teammates in another time zone, I can tag them in this stand-up channel. And once they wake up, they know, hey, I'm expecting something from you. So not as good as live stand-up, but it was pretty efficient for time distributed teams, and it's still alive after 2 years since we established it.
I second that with Alex. I really agree with him that our different Slack channels that he has created and the one-on-one that he has with us, and I have my one-on-one with the team that is below me. So it's really works for us. So we are communicated 24/7 basically, but the only one downside I see that sometimes we end up, nobody complains. So everybody is 24/7 on, but I wonder if that affects anybody. I mean, we don't mind doing any of that. We are happily working with each other, but I don't know what all it takes like later.
Well, that's a great, I think, thank you both for sharing. I think that's a great point in terms of, you showed a couple of great takeaways, which are creating a system and establishing a new rhythm and a new way to communicate amongst your team so that nobody feels lost. But I think that's a good question to dig into with your direct reports. When you have time to say, how is this affecting you, feeling like, you're on 24/7, and is there anything we could do differently or better, and just ask for that feedback in a non-judgmental way. But you really brought up some good points. There's some other good things here that are in the chat that I don't want to lose sight of. So Stephanie increased her one-on-one sessions, allowing more for expectations and relationship building. I think that's really important because if you're not in the cube or in the office next to them, or you can't take a lunch walk with folks, if you're not in the same time zone or same location, it's a great way to establish that rapport. So Stephanie, thanks for sharing that. And then Jen, seeing folks on video really helps because at least it's a way to feel that we're personally connected. And having more stand-ups to make sure people are on the same page. I'm just seeing if, Leo, that's a great idea. So you have social interaction by a walk with group phone calls. So it's like, you're all getting out there, you're getting exercise. That's a great idea in terms of the stress reduction and also feeling like, we're not just being overworked, and we have a new way to connect and take a walking meeting outside together in nature. So love that idea. And, we all need that we're all more sedentary than we were before, and we're all sitting like this all day. So thank you for all of your suggestions and ideas. And I'm sure some of the folks that are on this call can try to implement some of them as well. Yeah, Patrick, good point. So I don't want to lose sight of that. For some folks, it is, this is where it's really important to know who your team members are, how they operate, maybe what their personality profile is, a little bit more about whether or not the human connection fuels them or drains them. And so that is really important to make sure that that. Also, we are in this era where we're all working from home. So like, Rochelle, I'm just going to point you out for a minute. I just saw Rochelle's cat. So I'm like, okay, cool. Rochelle has a cat, but some people feel like a little embarrassed about maybe what their working situation is, or they don't want you to see the kids running behind or the dog barking at them or whatever that might be. So I think just understanding that on a human level, that we all have different things going on, and being respectful of that. And then also knowing your kind of behavioral profile of your team members. So just to review what we just talked about, and this is, that's good, Kathy. You do that now? No meeting Wednesday?
Starting to, at least within my teams. Yeah. So, as everybody spoke, I mean, I think, meeting fatigue is happening across the business, and many people are in meetings all day long. And then the end of the day comes and everybody's like, okay, now I have to do my work, and that kind of, goes into, kind of, the boundaries that we spoke about. And sometimes, I love the idea about, what you spoke about, Amanda, in terms of if you are going to have a meeting, have an agenda, make sure the right people are there. And there's other ways that other people can get the information for the meeting rather than attending it. Or sometimes if you can afford to within your groups, really try to encourage maybe a day that, we're trying to keep our, calendars free to actually get some work done. And that might not happen 100% across all businesses, but the more that you can maybe encourage that, it might help just alleviate some of that, stress and strain that people feel about just being in meetings 24/7.
Yes. I know in the company my husband works for, I think it's Thursday afternoons. All of them have blocked off, I think it's 3 or 4 hours where they just have time to create and think. Because they can if they want, they could collaborate with somebody else on their team, but it's important for them that they can work on some of their own projects, and also not feel the burden of having to respond on their Slack channel or Teams channel, whatever they use. So it's a great point. So I want to honor all of your time. So I think we have a few more minutes. I'm just going to summarize here really quickly in terms of that flexing of the management style. And all of you that are sharing in the chat hit upon it, which is really just thinking about where your direct reports are now in terms of their level of skill and interest, helping them to develop their careers, and also committing to have all minds at the table. So, we're human beings, so we're not always going to get everything 100% right. And so some of this new way of working is some trial and error, but it's really important to say, hey, I'm going to practice this. I'm going to try something, even being transparent with your team to say, I'm seeing that people are feeling like they're maybe not getting all the information that they need. So I'm going to up it to, 2 one-on-ones a month so that we can connect on a personal level and really only have team meetings based around projects where the folks that are involved, like we're going to try something new here. So, just sharing with that you're trying to really make the team more efficient and effective, and also working for their best interests. And also asking for feedback, what's going well, what's not going well, how can I be more attentive to you? And then, really making sure that your team knows what's important. So if we just talk quickly about what we've covered today, I know there was a lot in terms of talking about expectations and setting people up for success, asking the right questions of your team, really communicating and thinking about the channels of communicating and how you want to communicate, as well as starting to build some of that trust and creating some social interaction with folks as well. We do have a couple more minutes. I just want to make sure I haven't lost anything in the chat. I know, Matthew, you wrote something in here. Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea in terms of your meetings, making sure that well in advance, you have a clear agenda, soliciting input, providing meeting notes. Yeah. So I think number 2 on there, Matthew, is really around that setting expectations and helping your team to create boundaries and knowing they don't have to be on 24/7. Yeah, taking a vacation, like allowing your team that space to breathe. Yeah, and for number 3, I think everybody's work and life are way more blended than they were before. It's really hard to see the lines or draw the lines. One of the things that we've talked to other teams about is creating some form of ritual. So meaning it used to be for some of us that we would get into the car, drive 90 minutes, get out of the car, park the car, go to work. And that was like the brain switch. Like our brain knew this was the rhythm, this was the ritual that I go through to go to work. And so we've actually had folks on teams where, because they don't know when to switch off, they have left their homes if you have a car, and they've driven around their block in their car, come back to their homes, taken the key out of the ignition, walked in the house, because it was their brain's way of saying we're done for the day. So maybe there's things like that you can look at to say, let's create a ritual that tells our brains, we're starting work now. And then once we do a 20-minute walk in the neighborhood or with the dog or with the kids, whatever it is, then we know it's time to switch off. I know, Matthew, if you're in a B2B and sales environment, that can become more challenging if you're working across time zones and you have big deals you're working towards. So even thinking through, is there anything else you can put in place so your team feels like they can get out of that overwork, overstress environment? So Alex, we'll let Kathy answer that question. Oh, that's great, Courtney. And then, yeah. Okay. So any other, I think I saw everybody on the chat. Any other questions, comments, situations you're dealing with while me and Kathy are here on the call that you want to bring up and share, or even best practices that you can share with folks? We're here for another couple of minutes before we jump into the next session. So let us know if there's anything else you'd like for us to address. I know this was a quick fire session, but we hope you'll also be able to attend the next session, which will be towards the end of September, and it will be around communicating in an ever-changing environment. So if you're not on the next session we have today, which is building resiliency, we're going to be talking about resiliency in about 15 minutes. So feel free to join that. And then the next session will be towards the end of September, which is communicating in an ever-changing environment. So let us know if you have anything else we can address today. We appreciate all of you showing up and being here and sharing and being willing to give best practices to your colleagues. It's extremely helpful as we're all navigating this together.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everybody for joining. And we're certainly going to be sending some, helpful tips and some, guideposts to help everybody build up their toolkit, as well as we'll be making some recommendations on a self-paced basis, a few topics that, pertain to, to this session, from LinkedIn Learning, for yourself. So stay tuned for some follow-up, content to reinforce, how we can all kind of navigate these new waters in better and more, effective ways. Great.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.